Oscar Piastri has spent most of this season navigating one of the most delicate competitive environments in modern Formula One. At McLaren, the balance between two drivers fighting for a world championship was always going to be difficult to maintain, and the effects of that pressure have become more visible as the campaign has progressed. What began as a finely poised internal rivalry started to tilt after a sequence of difficult weekends for Piastri. His rhythm slipped following Baku, a weekend he openly described as the worst of his racing career, and the loss of momentum was only amplified by Brazil, where a 10-second penalty further eroded his hopes. Even Charles Leclerc felt the incident was not solely Piastri's fault, but McLaren nonetheless avoided challenging the steward's verdict. This drop in form came shortly after the Monza team order that required Piastri to hand a position back to Lando Norris, despite having gained it due to Norris's slow pit stop. The Singapore Grand Prix then added more friction. Early contact led Piastri to request a position swap, but the team backed the steward's decision of no further action. Against this backdrop, Guenther Steiner's comments gained significance. Steiner argued that if Piastri failed to win the championship, he should reconsider his place at McLaren, pointing out that a young driver of his caliber needs an environment that fully backs him. Rumours linking Piastri to Ferrari for 2027 have only strengthened the sense that alternative paths might already be forming. Meanwhile, Norris has capitalised on every opening, extending his lead and intensifying McLaren's internal tensions. Yet amid all this, Lewis Hamilton has offered a contrasting assessment, praising Piastri's consistency and his suitability as a future world champion. The central question is now unavoidable. If this internal pressure continues and Steiner's concerns prove justified, what is the most realistic destination for Oscar Piastri beyond McLaren? If you want to follow the full analysis, make sure to stay subscribed so you don't miss what comes next. The situation surrounding Piastri and McLaren cannot be understood without looking closely at the turning points that brought him to this crossroads. Earlier in the season, Piastri appeared to be in complete control of his campaign. He was driving with a clarity and precision that suggested a driver growing more confident by the week, and after the Dutch Grand Prix, he led the World Championship by 34 points over Norris. It was a position built on consistency, calm decision-making, and an ability to convert opportunities without overreaching. For a moment, it looked like McLaren would have to confront an internal scenario they had not faced in decades, both drivers fighting for the same title with little to separate their performance peaks. Then everything shifted. The Monza Grand Prix was the first sign of unease. Piastri had driven a strong race and was on course for second place, but McLaren instructed him to give the position back to Norris following the latter's slow pit stop caused by a faulty wheel gun. Piastri questioned the logic at the time, reminding the team that slow stops were part of racing, but he complied. He later accepted the decision publicly, yet the incident remained a talking point as his season began to unravel. By Baku, the combination of a difficult Friday, an engine problem in FP1, the tricky C6 compounds, and a growing sense of frustration produced a weekend that Piastri summarised bluntly. "There's no beating around the bush. That was the worst weekend I've ever had in racing." From that moment, the momentum swung heavily towards Norris. While Norris found rhythm and consistency, winning in Mexico City and Brazil, Piastri's form continued to deteriorate. The points gap collapsed, then reversed and grew further as Piastri failed to stand on a podium after Monza. Each weekend seemed to produce another small complication. Crashes in the Austin Sprint and Brazil Sprint, contact at Singapore, the need to adapt his driving style in ways that didn't suit him, and a car balance that drifted away from what he had relied on earlier in the year. In a championship fight where every detail counts, these cumulative setbacks became decisive. Steiner's perspective enters sharply here. Speaking on the Red Flags podcast, he was direct. "Especially if he doesn't win the championship, I think he has got a good chance to get in any other good car. He's a good driver and change sometimes is good. He's young enough he can adapt to it." His message was not an attack on McLaren but a reflection on the environment required for a young driver to grow. Steiner went further, criticising the team's handling of the Brazil penalty, arguing that McLaren should have fought harder for Piastri. "Why you don't go there and at least say something to the stewards?" he said. "You need to fight for your team." It was a pointed remark, one that underlined the perception that McLaren had become overly cautious in moments where support could have mattered. Charles Leclerc's own view on the Brazil incident added context. He felt that Kimi Antonelli shared responsibility and that Piastri should not be held fully at fault. Andrea Stella acknowledged the penalty was on the harsh side, but emphasised the team's respect for the stewards and their choice to move on. It was a pragmatic response, but one that did little to support Piastri in a moment where the competitive pressure around him was already significant. NASA or political diplomacy may value neutrality. A title fight rarely does. This is where external voices begin to frame the broader narrative. Juan Pablo Montoya has argued that the internal dynamic at McLaren will change whichever driver wins the championship. Predicting that one of them will feel unsupported, Ralf Schumacher has been more explicit, suggesting the relationship between Norris and Piastri is not exactly on the best of terms, despite Piastri publicly insisting it is better than ever. For Schumacher, the accumulation of wheel-to-wheel clashes in Singapore, the Austin Sprint and elsewhere, is evidence of a growing tension that both drivers may be underplaying. Jos Verstappen, never a passive observer, introduced yet another layer by questioning whether McLaren were favouring Norris. He pointed to Piastri's declining form and asked openly whether something in the team's operation had shifted. "Piastri couldn't have suddenly forgotten how to drive," he said, pushing the conversation into a more political space. Piastri dismissed the suggestion firmly. "There's certainly nothing suspicious." He reiterated the transparency within McLaren and the freedom both drivers have to express their views internally. But dismissing external noise does not make it disappear. The rumour linking Piastri to Ferrari for 2027 created a new storyline, one that aligned neatly, perhaps too neatly, with Steiner's advice. According to a Swiss report, Piastri has already set his sights on Ferrari, a move that could be triggered by the future decisions of Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton. Leclerc has been connected to multiple teams, and Hamilton may choose not to continue beyond 2026 unless he activates an extension. Mark Webber, Piastri's manager, did little to cool the speculation, reportedly acknowledging Ferrari as a potential destination while emphasising Piastri's ongoing development at McLaren. He even noted that improving his Italian might not be a bad idea. None of this is definitive, but in Formula One, interest alone can be meaningful. Lewis Hamilton's assessment offered a counterpoint. He praised Piastri's season, calling his work fantastic, and noting how impressive it has been to watch McLaren's resurgence with two drivers operating at such a high level. He highlighted the immense pressure both drivers face, suggesting that the challenges confronting Piastri are not unusual for someone engaged in a title fight against a teammate of similar caliber. Hamilton's words do not negate the tensions, but do place them in a context familiar to anyone who has fought for a championship inside a top team. What remains is the trajectory of the relationship between Piastri and McLaren from here. Norris's recent run has placed him as the clear championship favourite, and the points gap has widened enough to raise real questions about whether Piastri can recover in time. Steiner argues that if he cannot, the winter should be a period of resetting, and if that proves impossible, a change of team may be the best route. Given the whispers around Ferrari, the comment no longer feels theoretical. The decisive factor might not be performance alone, but the alignment of expectations. Piastri wants to win on his own merit, and he has made that clear. McLaren insist they do not favour either driver. Yet the combination of team orders, stewarding decisions, internal collisions, a shifting car balance and a rival teammate on a surge has put Piastri in a situation few anticipated earlier in the season. Whether this is a temporary collapse or the beginning of a deeper fracturing is the question that now matters most. If McLaren cannot provide the environment Piastri needs to take the next step, and if Steiner's assessment of the situation proves accurate, then the final question becomes unavoidable. Should Oscar Piastri remain committed to McLaren's long-term project, or is a future in red beginning to make more sense than anyone expected?